It started with a silence no one expected. Not the kind of silence that fills a room before a test or the kind that settles when the teacher walks in. This was different. This was the kind of silence that follows a slap, not a physical one, but something just as sharp. Ms. Anderson stood still by the whiteboard, dry erase marker in hand, her head slowly turning toward the back row. "Say it again," she asked, voice cold, almost amused. Jamal Carter sat 2 seats from the window, hood halfway off his head, one arm slung over his desk like he had nowhere better to be. But his voice was clear, even, and completely unshaken. "I said the answer is -64. Laughter stirred in pockets across the classroom. Not the full-blown belly kind, more like snorts and whispered chuckles, the kind that students let out when they think they've just witnessed a public mistake. Brett, sitting in the front like always, grinned and leaned back in his chair. "Man, that's wild," he muttered loud enough for a few others to hear. Ms. Anderson crossed her arms. "Jamal, that's incorrect. Try again, or just, let someone else give it a real shot." She didn't hide the way she said it, her tone curled at the edges like burnt paper. Jamal didn't respond right away. He just looked at her, unreadable. The moment hung there, thick, like the air right before it rains. The problem on the board was simple enough. -4, 3 + 2, 8. To most students, it looked like another quick warm-up before the actual lesson. But to Jamal, it was something else. A test, not of math, but of patience. Of pride. He knew how they saw him. Not failing, exactly, just invisible. A smart kid hidden behind a tired hoodie and a permanent look of disinterest. He didn't raise his hand much, didn't speak unless he had to. And when he did speak up, well, they didn't listen. Ms. Anderson turned back to the board, smiling stiffly. "Can someone give me the correct answer?" Eliza, 2 rows ahead of Jamal, hesitated, then raised her hand. "Wouldn't -4 cubed be -64, she said carefully. "And then 2 times 8 is 16, so, -48. The room shifted. It was subtle, just a few students straightening in their chairs, others exchanging looks. Ms. Anderson's marker froze mid-stroke. She blinked, then did the math quietly under her breath. Her face didn't change, but the air did. "Yes," she said finally. "That is correct." No one moved. No one laughed now. Jamal leaned back, the hint of a smirk playing on his lips, but not out of smugness. It was more like confirmation, the quiet satisfaction of someone who knew he was right all along. "I said that," he repeated, voice low, but pointed. Ms. Anderson didn't respond. She turned to erase the board with sharp, mechanical strokes. The dry erase marker squeaked like it wanted to scream for her. Someone in the room whispered, "She really just shut him down, and he was right." Another voice snorted, "Yo, someone clip that." A phone screen lit up in the corner of the classroom. Ms. Anderson turned around, suddenly stern. "Phones away. Now." But it was too late. The moment had already been captured, the dismissal, the correction, the truth of it. A short video clip that said everything words didn't have to. And somewhere in the middle of it, Jamal sat back and let the silence speak for him. When the bell rang, no one moved right away. Jamal packed up slowly, zipped his hoodie all the way up, and slung his bag over one shoulder. As he passed Ms. Anderson's desk on his way out, she avoided his eyes. Her lips pressed into a line like she was about to say something, maybe explain, maybe excuse herself. But the words stayed trapped behind pride. Outside, the sky was overcast, the air thick with early fall chill. Jamal walked down the steps of Roosevelt High like he always did, alone, quiet, measured. But something felt different. Not heavier, lighter. Like the truth had taken some of the weight off his back. At the bus stop, he pulled out his phone. The clip was already up on TikTok. Someone had added a caption. When your teacher tries to clown you but forgets your built different smiling face with sunglasses #justice for Jamal #math mic drop. 10,000 views in under an hour. He didn't smile. He just watched it once, then locked his phone and stared across the street. For once, he wasn't trying to be seen. He already had been. And somewhere in that small classroom, Ms. Anderson sat alone at her desk, her screen casting a pale blue light onto her face as she scrolled through the same clip. Over. And over. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Before Jamal Carter ever proved a teacher wrong, before the clip went viral, before hashtags with his name bounced across apps he barely used, he was just a kid trying not to disappear. On the south side of Chicago, the streets weren't all bad, but they were loud, crowded, and unforgiving. Noise never stopped. Sirens at night, arguments through thin apartment walls, bass from car speakers shaking the glass just enough to remind you the city was alive and didn't care how tired you were. That morning, before school, Jamal had stood in front of the bathroom mirror brushing his hair with the same cracked brush he'd had since middle school. The lights flickered when someone ran the microwave in the kitchen, it always did that. He didn't rush. Didn't smile, didn't sigh. He just did what he always did, got ready like he had somewhere to be, even when it felt like no one expected him to show up. His mom, Patrice, worked the overnight shift at the hospital cafeteria and still managed to make it home by 7 a.m. just to cook breakfast for her kids. She was still in her scrubs, sneakers unlaced, hair tied up in a messy bun. Tired was an understatement, she was running on caffeine, faith, and the hope that at least one of her kids wouldn't fall through the cracks. Toast or cereal? She asked without looking up from the frying pan. Cereal's fine, Jamal said, already reaching for the cabinet. You sure? She asked, glancing over her shoulder. I can make. I'm good, Ma. She nodded slowly, then went back to stirring the eggs. You know, Ms. Anderson called me again last week, she said after a pause. Said you don't speak up in class much. Said you seem distracted. Jamal didn't answer right away. He poured his cereal, added just enough milk to keep it from getting soggy. I speak when I need to. His mom turned off the stove. The kitchen smelled like butter and burnt edges. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. You speak like your daddy, quiet, but always thinking something. He didn't respond. He never liked talking about his dad. The man had walked out before Jamal's 10th birthday and hadn't called since. Jamal stopped caring years ago, or at least, he told himself he had. I just don't want them writing you off, his mom continued. They already think they know you before you open your mouth. They do, Jamal said simply. She frowned. That doesn't mean you let them. His little sister, Ava, popped into the kitchen wearing her backpack upside down and socks that didn't match. She tugged at Jamal's sleeve. Can you walk me to the bus stop? Yeah, he mumbled, finishing the last of his cereal. Ava was the only person who made Jamal soften. Maybe it was her missing front tooth or the way she talked to her stuffed animals like they were coworkers. She never saw him as quiet or moody, just Jamal, the guy who could fix her doll's broken arm with tape and draw hearts in her lunchbox with Sharpie. Outside, the street was still damp from last night's rain. Jamal walked Ava 2 blocks down, said goodbye with a fist bump, and watched her climb onto the bus. Then he kept walking. Roosevelt High wasn't the worst school in the district, but it was close. The building looked like someone had tried to fix it years ago, then gave up halfway. The windows stuck. The heaters rattled. And the teachers were either brand new or burned out, sometimes both. Jamal had been here long enough to learn the rules: don't cause a scene. Don't speak unless you can back it up. Don't trust people who smile too much. He'd also learned how to disappear, how to sit just right so teachers overlooked him, how to keep a hoodie halfway up without getting written up, how to nod in the right places even when he disagreed. But Jamal wasn't average. Not even close. He'd taught himself algebra in 7th grade after his math teacher got fired halfway through the year. He solved puzzles online for fun, wrote logic riddles in the margins of his notebooks. His brain moved fast, faster than most kids, but his mouth moved slow, because he'd learned that speaking too soon meant giving people more reasons to assume things about you. And they always assumed the same things. That you were lazy. That you were angry. That you weren't paying attention, even when you saw everything. Even Ms. Anderson. He used to like her, actually, in freshman year, when she seemed fair, like the kind of teacher who didn't play favorites. But over time, that changed. She didn't look at him the same way she looked at other kids, especially the ones who wore polos and raised their hands just to hear themselves talk. Jamal never raised his hand. Not because he didn't know the answers, but because he knew what happened when he got them right. They stared. They questioned. And when he wasn't perfect, they laughed. So he stayed quiet. Until today. He didn't plan to say it out loud, that answer. It had just slipped out, louder than he meant it. And then it was too late to take back. The laughter. The tension. The way Ms. Anderson's face twisted when she realized she was wrong. Now everyone had seen it. And not just the class. By lunch, 3 different people had shown him the clip on their phones. "Yo, you're famous now," one kid said, grinning. "Math King Jamal." Jamal shrugged. "It's just math." "Nah, bro, it's more than that," the kid said, tapping the screen. "You clowned a teacher. On camera." But that wasn't the point. Jamal didn't want to clown anyone. He just wanted to be heard, really heard, for once. That afternoon, he sat outside the library window during free period, sketching something in his notebook. Not math, not a joke. A design, a blueprint for a machine that sorted books by weight and genre. Something ridiculous and brilliant. Something no one would believe came out of the kid in the hoodie with the quiet voice. As the sun dipped behind the clouds, and his classmates buzzed about TikTok and teachers and drama, Jamal sat still, halfway between invisible and unforgettable. He knew now, 5 minutes could change everything. But proving them wrong. That was only the beginning. Ms. Anderson sat alone at her desk long after the final bell rang, the hallway outside her classroom already emptied of students and the usual after-school chaos. The silence that filled the room wasn't peaceful, it was heavy, clinging to the corners of the space like smoke after something had burned. She had replayed the moment in her head 100 times since it happened. The question. The answer. The way Jamal had said it, not cocky, not loud, just calm. Sure of himself. And she had laughed. Worse, she had dismissed him. It wasn't the first time she'd shut a student down. Teachers do it all the time, especially when the room is rowdy and your lesson plan is already running behind and you're tired, bone deep, soul deep tired. But this one hit different. Because he'd been right. And the whole class had seen it. Ms. Anderson opened her laptop, pretending she was going to grade papers, but her fingers hovered uselessly over the keys. Instead, she opened her phone. The clip was everywhere. There she was, mid-sentence, eyebrows raised in disbelief as she challenged him, "Say it again." And there he was, Jamal, calm as stone, saying, "The answer is -64. The silence. The way the room shifted. Her correction. His quiet confirmation. "I said that." Her stomach twisted. The internet wasn't being kind. This teacher got humbled quick. They never expect the quiet kid to be the smartest. Why do they always do this to black kids? Always. She locked the screen and set the phone face down, pressing her palm against her forehead. It wasn't the video itself that stung, it was the truth inside it. The truth about the way she'd looked at him. The way she'd written him off without even realizing it. Her name was Caroline Anderson. 34 years old. Third-year math teacher at Roosevelt High. She didn't grow up here, she was from a small town in Iowa, where the worst thing a student ever brought to class was an energy drink. Teaching in Chicago wasn't the plan. It was the emergency option after the district in her hometown slashed budgets and froze hiring. She had moved here thinking it'd be temporary. But 1 year turned into 2, then 3. And Roosevelt turned into more than a job. It became a daily test of her patience, her resolve, her ability to hold it together in a system that felt constantly on the edge of falling apart. She had started off idealistic, bright-eyed, energetic, determined to make a difference. She brought in extra supplies, stayed after school, even visited students' homes once or twice. But that spark faded. It faded after her favorite student got arrested over spring break. It faded when another was pulled from her class after a CPS report she never saw coming. It faded every time she poured herself into a lesson only to be met with blank stares, rolling eyes, or the quiet resistance of kids who had learned not to care too soon. So she built walls. Quiet ones. Professional ones. She stopped asking too many questions. Stopped trying so hard to connect. And somewhere along the way, she stopped looking, really looking, at her students as full, complex people. She'd put Jamal in that same box. The doesn't try box. The smart but lazy box. The he's got potential but doesn't care box. She didn't even remember why. Probably a few missed assignments, a few days he didn't raise his hand. She'd assumed things. She'd been wrong. And she hadn't just dismissed his answer, she'd mocked it. In front of everyone. That's what stuck with her. The next morning, Ms. Anderson stood in front of the same whiteboard, hands clasped behind her back, watching the class settle in. She could feel the shift in energy before anyone even spoke. Students looked at her differently, not angry, but curious. Waiting. Watching. Jamal walked in a few minutes after the bell, hoodie up, same tired expression. He didn't look at her. He didn't have to. His presence alone was a reminder. Ms. Anderson cleared her throat. Before we start, she said, I want to take a second to talk about something that happened yesterday. A few students sat up straighter. I made a mistake, she said. I dismissed a student's answer, not because it was wrong, but because I didn't take the time to really listen. And when I realized that mistake, I didn't acknowledge it the way I should have. The room was quiet. She glanced around, then let her gaze rest on Jamal for a moment. Jamal gave the right answer. He deserved better from me. So I want to say, in front of everyone, I'm sorry. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't followed by applause or gasps. It just was. Jamal didn't nod. Didn't speak. But something in his expression shifted, barely, like a door opened a crack. He sat a little straighter in his seat. Pulled out his notebook. Looked directly at the board. And for the first time all year, Ms. Anderson saw him clearly. Not just the kid in the back row. Not just another student blending into the crowd. But Jamal Carter, sharp, quiet, overlooked. And not invisible anymore. The lesson began, and the board filled with numbers, variables, and graphs. Students raised their hands. Questions were asked. Mistakes were made. Corrections followed. But the atmosphere had changed. There was a new awareness in the room, like the static had cleared and something genuine was starting to form. Maybe the clip would keep circulating online. Maybe she'd still get called out on Twitter. But what mattered more was here, now, how she carried herself, how she showed up from this point forward. Because students remember more than just lessons. They remember how you made them feel. And yesterday, Ms. Anderson made a kid feel small. Today, she'd taken the first step toward making that right. The first thing Jamal noticed when he got home was the silence. The apartment felt too still, even for a late afternoon. It was a stark contrast to the chaos of the morning, when his little sister had rushed through the hallways in mismatched socks, giggling as she tripped over her own feet. But now, it was quiet. And that was never a good sign. His mom's car was gone. No surprise there, she was probably still at the hospital. She worked long shifts, 12 hours most days, sometimes more. It was a job she hated, but it kept food on the table and the lights on. Jamal knew how much it wore her down, but she never complained. At least, not in front of him. But the silence in the apartment now felt different. It wasn't the usual stillness after school, when Jamal would make himself a snack and start his homework. This silence was thick, filled with a tension he couldn't quite put his finger on. He dropped his backpack on the couch and walked into the small kitchen. The place looked the same, dishes piled high in the sink, the old fridge buzzing with life. But something about the empty space made his chest tighten. Jamal pulled a chair out and sat down at the kitchen table. The dim light from the window threw shadows across the room. He was still thinking about the moment with Ms. Anderson earlier, how, for once, he felt seen. And yet, there was a gnawing feeling in the back of his mind, like a door that wouldn't close. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He picked up his phone to text his mom, but then he hesitated. "Hey Ma, where are you? Everything okay?" But before he could send it, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was from Ava. "Jamal?" Her voice was small, like she was trying to hold something back. "Where are you?" "I'm at home," Jamal said, sitting up straighter. "Why? What's up?" A pause on the other end, then, "You need to come get me." "I'm scared." "Scared? What's going on?" Panic started to rise in Jamal's chest. He was halfway out of the chair before she answered. Ava sniffed, then there was a sound in the background, like a door slamming. "It's Daddy. He's here." Jamal's heart sank, a cold wave washing over him. His dad had been gone for years, and in all that time, he'd never once come back. Not for birthdays, not for holidays. Not for anything. "What do you mean, he's there?" Jamal asked, voice tight. "Where?" "He just walked into the apartment. Said he's staying for a while." Ava's voice wavered, and Jamal could hear the fear in it. "He's yelling at Mom." Jamal slammed his hand down on the table, the noise sharp in the otherwise quiet room. "What the hell?" Ava started crying. "Jamal, please, come home. I don't know what to do. He's mad." Jamal's mind raced. He hadn't even thought about his dad in so long, but now everything that was buried came flooding back. The broken promises. The excuses. The lies. He could feel his breath quickening, his body tensing as he stood up and grabbed his jacket. "I'm coming," he said, and the call ended. He knew what this was. His dad had a way of showing up when everything was already bad. When things were fragile, when the cracks in their lives were most visible. And now that he was back, Jamal couldn't stop the flood of memories from crashing over him. His father had been the kind of man who could be charming when he wanted to be, but he also had a way of making people feel small. He'd done it to Jamal's mom. And he'd done it to Jamal. When Jamal was younger, he would sit in the corner of the room, watching his mom make excuses for his dad, hoping that maybe, just maybe, one day, he would be the man he promised to be. But every time, he let them down. Every single time. Now, his dad was back, and Jamal wasn't sure what hurt more, the fact that he had returned, or the fact that he still had that same power over him, even though he'd been absent for so long. By the time Jamal arrived at the apartment, the front door was ajar. He pushed it open slowly, trying not to make a sound. The apartment felt even emptier now, even though he could hear muffled voices from down the hall. He moved quietly, his footsteps silent on the worn floorboards. As he reached the living room, he saw his father. Ray Carter was slouched on the couch, a bottle of cheap liquor in his hand, the room around him thick with smoke and tension. He hadn't changed much over the years. Same tall frame, same scowl, same eyes that never seemed to look at you with anything close to affection. Jamal's stomach twisted just seeing him there. His mom stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, face tight with the strain of years of arguments, of waiting. She wasn't crying. She hadn't cried in years. Jamal didn't know what to say. He had spent so many years learning how to avoid this confrontation, how to pretend his dad wasn't a part of his life. But now that he was back, it felt like all that avoidance was pointless. He had to face this. "Dad," Jamal's voice was low, tight. He didn't know if he was ready for this, but Ava was still crying on the phone. She was waiting for him to make things better, and he couldn't let her down. Ray looked up slowly, a slow smirk spreading across his face. Look who decided to show up. The quiet one. He took a long swig from the bottle, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling mixture of arrogance and disdain. "Been a while, hasn't it, son?" Jamal stood still, fists clenched by his sides. "What are you doing here, Ray?" His dad's expression shifted, the amusement fading, replaced with something darker. "I'm here to fix things. To fix this." Jamal didn't respond. He didn't know what else to say. The weight of the last few years had been building, and the anger was bubbling up in his chest. He hadn't seen his dad in so long. And now, he was back, making demands. Ava's voice echoed in his mind, "Please, Jamal. Come home. I'm scared. I'm here to make sure my family's in one piece, Jamal," his dad said, his voice cold. "That includes you." But Jamal knew better now. He wasn't the same quiet kid who had waited in the corner, hoping for his dad to show up. He wasn't invisible anymore. And he wasn't going to let his dad control him any longer. "I'm not your pawn," Jamal said, his voice steady but firm. "You don't get to come back and decide how things go." Ray stood up suddenly, his face flushed with anger. "You think you're better than me now?" Jamal didn't answer. He didn't need to. He turned and walked toward the hallway, his steps sure and heavy. "You're not welcome here anymore." For the first time, his dad didn't stop him. He didn't raise his voice, didn't try to argue. He just watched Jamal leave. Jamal didn't look back. The next day at school, Jamal walked into Ms. Anderson's class with a different feeling in his chest. Yesterday's apology still lingered in his mind, but now, it was buried beneath a weight of confusion. His dad's return, the confrontation at home, all of it felt like a storm he couldn't escape. Yet somehow, his resolve had hardened. He was done being passive, done hiding in the back of the classroom and in his own life. He was going to be seen. He had already taken a stand at home, now it was time to do the same in the one place he thought he could escape his family's drama, school. As he slid into his seat, he caught Ms. Anderson's eyes across the room. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if acknowledging that something had shifted. But there was no time to linger on that. Class started, and Ms. Anderson began writing equations on the board, speaking in her usual calm, measured tone. Jamal's eyes flickered over the numbers. He wasn't a fan of math, never had been. He'd always been more of a quiet observer than an active participant. But after the events of yesterday, something about the idea of solving problems, real, tangible problems, felt different. Like maybe it could be a way to make sense of things. He felt the sting of last week's quiz still, the one he had failed miserably. Ms. Anderson had made him stay after class for a private conversation. Her disappointment hadn't been harsh, but it had been real. She didn't yell. She didn't even try to scold him. She just looked at him with eyes that saw more than his grades. "Why don't you try harder?" She had asked him, genuinely curious. That question stuck with him. Why didn't he? The answer used to be easy, because no one ever expected him to. Not his dad. Not the people at school. Why bother if the world only saw you as a statistic, a potential dropout, another kid who'd just end up being another statistic? But he couldn't keep answering that way. Not anymore. Not after what happened yesterday. So when Ms. Anderson called on him to solve the equation on the board, he stood up without thinking. He didn't hesitate. He just grabbed the marker and walked to the front of the class. The whole room grew silent. Jamal stared at the problem in front of him. The numbers swam together for a second, as if mocking him. But he pushed through, his mind flicking back to the times he had watched Ms. Anderson solve problems on the board, how easy it seemed to her. How methodical. He started scribbling, taking it step by step, breaking it down, trying to make sense of it in pieces. The more he worked through the problem, the more it clicked. Something inside him was unlocking. He could hear Ms. Anderson's voice in his head, calm but steady, guiding him through the process. You have to break it down into smaller pieces, Jamal. Just like life. It's never one big problem, it's a series of steps. His hand moved more confidently now, the numbers beginning to fit together like pieces of a puzzle. The weight in his chest lifted, if only for a moment, as he felt a strange sense of control. Finally, he finished. The solution was there, clean, precise. He turned to face the class, unsure of what to expect. But then he saw Ms. Anderson's eyes, not judgmental, not surprised, but appreciative. Good work, Jamal, she said, her voice firm yet warm. Well done. The room was still quiet, but it wasn't the tense silence he was used to. It was one of respect. One of acknowledgement. For the first time in a long time, Jamal didn't feel invisible. After class, Jamal walked out into the hallway, his mind still buzzing. There was a part of him that felt proud, but another part of him that felt disoriented, like he had stepped into an unfamiliar world and somehow managed to not completely fall apart. As he turned the corner, he nearly collided with Ava, who was standing in front of his locker, her arms crossed. Her face was flushed, her eyes wide with something between excitement and worry. You're different, she said, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. What happened? Jamal shifted awkwardly. I don't know. I guess something clicked in class. Ms. Anderson, she's not the worst. Ava raised an eyebrow. Wait. You're telling me you actually talked in class? Yeah, Jamal admitted, feeling a bit embarrassed but also strangely empowered. I don't know. I did it. Ava smirked. Well, look at you. Mr. Confidence. Jamal shrugged. It's just math. I still don't get half of it. I don't get any of it, Ava shot back, laughing. But hey, at least you're trying. The bell rang, signaling the start of the next class. Jamal hesitated for a second, feeling the familiar pang of doubt in his chest. But this time, he didn't give in to it. He nodded at Ava and gave her a quick hug before heading off to his next class. But something was different. There was no crushing weight of failure hanging over him, no constant voice in his head telling him that he wasn't good enough. Maybe it was because of the small victory with Ms. Anderson. Maybe it was the fact that, for once, he'd chosen to face something head-on instead of running away. Later that evening, Jamal sat at his desk, the homework spread out in front of him. For once, he didn't feel like procrastinating. He didn't feel the familiar urge to shut the books and walk away. He picked up his pencil, ready to dive in. This time, the numbers didn't seem so daunting. They felt like something he could conquer. And for the first time in a long time, Jamal believed that he could actually be more than what everyone expected him to be. The next few days felt like a series of tests Jamal wasn't sure he was ready for. On the surface, things had changed. He was answering questions in class, engaging more, and slowly starting to find himself in the world of math, a space he had never felt comfortable in. Ms. Anderson's encouraging words still rang in his head, pushing him forward. But underneath that fragile confidence, the weight of everything else pressed down on him like a heavy cloak he couldn't shrug off. His mom hadn't come home that night. Or the next. Jamal knew the drill by now. She had always worked long shifts, but it was different this time. He could feel the shift in the air. Her absence wasn't just physical. It was emotional, too. The silence in their small apartment was different now, it carried the heavy undertones of something unresolved. When he walked into the kitchen that morning, there was a note on the table, the same note his mom had left him countless times before. Jamal, I'll be home late tonight. Please take care of Ava. You're doing great. I'm proud of you. Don't forget to eat dinner. Love, Ma. But Jamal's chest tightened when he saw the words. The familiar guilt that always seemed to follow his mom's absence gnawed at him. He wasn't sure what hurt more, the fact that she wasn't there, or the fact that she kept leaving, as if she were disappearing into a life that didn't include him. It wasn't that Jamal blamed her. He knew she was doing everything she could to keep them afloat. But lately, it felt like the space between them had grown. It wasn't the comfortable silence of an ordinary day. It was the kind of silence that felt like a chasm, one that Jamal didn't know how to bridge. And then there was his dad. Ray hadn't shown up again after that day at the apartment. No texts, no calls. Jamal had no idea where he was, but he didn't care. Still, the thought of him lingered in the back of his mind, haunting him. The way he'd looked at Jamal like he was something to be fixed, as if the years of neglect could be wiped away with a single apology. That morning, Jamal had tried to push it all out of his head, focusing on school. But it was hard to concentrate when his stomach was in knots, when his thoughts kept drifting to everything that was wrong, everything that felt like it was slowly slipping out of his control. The bell rang, signaling the end of the day, and Jamal stood up from his seat, grabbing his backpack with a heavy sigh. His mind wasn't on the lessons he'd just learned or the math equations he'd solved. He wasn't thinking about Ms. Anderson's praise or the small victories he'd earned in class. He was thinking about home. Ava's text had come in during the last period. Jamal, Ma's not home. Can you pick up some food? Jamal didn't respond right away. He couldn't help but wonder if Ava even realized how much that small text pulled him further into the weight of it all. She was still a kid, still caught up in the world of make-believe and childish optimism. She didn't understand what it meant to be responsible for someone else, to be the one holding everything together, even when it felt like it was all falling apart. But he couldn't leave her hanging. Jamal walked out of the school building, the cold air biting at his skin. He didn't have much money on him, just enough for a couple of sandwiches. It wasn't much, but it was something. He headed to the nearby deli, the same one he'd been visiting for years. The deli owner, Mr. Henry, always smiled when Jamal came in. He knew him by name now, knew his family's story, knew how tough things were. And even though Jamal tried to act like it didn't bother him, it did, the way people pitied them. They could see it in his eyes. They could see the way Jamal's shoulders carried the weight of the world on them. "Hey, kid," Mr. Henry greeted him with a nod. "How's it going today?" Jamal forced a smile. "Same as usual." Mr. Henry raised an eyebrow. "I hear your mom's been working late again." Jamal shifted uncomfortably. "Yeah. It's been tough." The older man didn't press. Instead, he reached under the counter and pulled out a bag. "Got something for you." Jamal blinked, surprised. "What's this?" Mr. Henry slid the bag across the counter with a knowing look. "A little something extra. Tell your mom it's on me. She works too hard." "You too, kid." Jamal stared at the bag for a second before reaching for it. It wasn't much, just some extra sandwiches and a soda, but it meant something. It meant that, in the midst of everything, there were still people who cared. That thought was the only thing that kept him from feeling completely suffocated by the expectations of his life. "Thanks, Mr. Henry," Jamal said quietly, his voice full of gratitude he couldn't quite express. "No problem, Jamal. You take care of your sister, all right?" He nodded, and with the bag in hand, he walked out of the deli and into the world that seemed to move faster than he could keep up with. When he got home, Ava was already sitting at the table, her homework spread out in front of her. She didn't look up when he entered, but the moment she saw the bag, her face lit up. "Sandwiches," she exclaimed, jumping up and rushing to the table. "You're the best, Jamal." He smiled, setting the bag down and opening it. Yeah. Don't get too excited." Ava grabbed the sandwich like it was the best thing she'd eaten in days, devouring it in seconds. Jamal sat down across from her, but his mind was still elsewhere. There was a constant weight pressing on him. Not the weight of schoolwork. Not even the weight of his grades or his future. It was the weight of being the one who had to hold everything together, for his mom, for Ava, for himself. And it wasn't just the responsibility that felt heavy. It was the expectations. The pressure to do well. To be something more than just another kid from a broken home. He couldn't help but feel like he was failing, even when he was succeeding. Ms. Anderson had given him a glimmer of hope. Her faith in him had been a small spark, but it was the only thing keeping him from losing everything. And yet, every time he thought he could take a breath, something else came crashing down. His father's shadow. His mother's absence. The expectations to fix things that weren't his to fix. "Are you okay?" Ava's voice brought him back to the moment. He looked up at her, her innocent brown eyes searching his face. "Yeah, I'm fine," he lied. She didn't believe him, but she didn't push. Instead, she smiled and took another bite of her sandwich. Jamal knew that he had to keep going. No matter how heavy it all felt, he couldn't stop. There were people counting on him. People who didn't have the luxury of falling apart. And as much as he hated it, he knew that if he didn't keep moving forward, everything else would fall apart, too. The weeks seemed to blur together in a haze of schoolwork, late-night meals with Ava, and the constant weight of expectations he could never quite escape. Jamal was trying, really trying, to push forward. He answered questions in class now, raised his hand even when his stomach twisted with anxiety. Ms. Anderson's words stayed with him, "Just take it one step at a time." But the truth was, every step he took felt like a tightrope walk. The tiniest slip could send him tumbling back into the abyss of failure. The tension at home was growing. His mom's shifts were getting longer, and every time he reached out to his dad, there was no response. It had been weeks since the last time Ray showed up at the apartment. Jamal didn't know if his father had just moved on, or if he was simply waiting for something to happen. He didn't know if he was waiting for Jamal to come to him, or if he was waiting for Jamal to give up on him altogether. But Jamal wasn't giving up. Not yet. And then came the moment he had been avoiding for weeks, the school assembly. Every year, the school held an assembly to recognize students who had shown promise in academics, sports, or extracurriculars. Jamal had always stayed out of the spotlight, never raising his hand for the awards, never seeking the praise. But this year, something had shifted. There was a part of him that wanted to be seen, to be recognized, even if it was just once. Ms. Anderson had pulled him aside a few days earlier, and her words still echoed in his mind. "Jamal, you've made real progress. Your test scores have improved, and you've been more engaged in class. I know you're going through a lot right now, but I think you've earned a spot in the assembly. It's a small step, but it's something." At first, Jamal had wanted to refuse. He wasn't the type of person to stand up and be applauded. He didn't want anyone's pity or their forced admiration. But there was something in Ms. Anderson's voice, something that made him wonder if maybe this was a chance to prove something, not to them, but to himself. The day of the assembly arrived, and Jamal found himself standing in the crowded gymnasium, feeling out of place. The bright lights overhead made everything seem too real, too loud, as if he could barely hear his own thoughts. He stood with the other students who had been selected, athletes, student council members, and a few kids who had perfect grades. And then there was Jamal, the kid who had spent most of his life flying under the radar, hoping to blend in and avoid attention. But today was different. Ms. Anderson's encouragement was in the back of his mind. "You've earned this, Jamal. You deserve it." As the assembly began, Jamal stood with the rest of the students, trying to ignore the knot in his stomach. He could hear the principal's voice over the speakers, calling out names, recognizing achievements. But all Jamal could think about was his mom, still not home, still working her late shifts. He wished she could be here to see him. To see that, for once, he was doing something more than just surviving. He didn't know what he was expecting, but the moment his name was called, it hit him like a wave. "Jamal Carter," the principal announced. For his improvements in mathematics and his continued commitment to his studies, Jamal has shown real progress this year. Jamal felt a rush of heat in his cheeks, and for a moment, everything went silent. He stepped forward, trying to ignore the eyes on him, the weight of their gaze. He reached the front of the stage, where the principal handed him a small certificate, the kind that felt like it could tear in half if you breathed on it wrong. He turned toward the audience, his heart hammering in his chest. The applause was polite, respectful. They weren't cheering for him, they were cheering for the idea of progress, of potential. But then he saw her. Ms. Anderson, sitting at the back of the gym, her eyes locked on him. She smiled, and for the first time in a long time, Jamal felt something shift in him. The tightness in his chest loosened. This wasn't just about the applause. It was about him realizing he was more than what he had believed. Jamal walked back to his seat, his mind racing. This was supposed to be a moment of triumph. But instead, he felt like he was standing on the edge of something much deeper, something he didn't quite understand yet. As he sat back down, he caught Ava's eyes across the gym. She was clapping, her face beaming with pride. She hadn't been able to come to the assembly, their mom's absence had left her behind, just like him. But her joy was real, and it made his chest swell with something close to hope. But when Jamal sat down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. After the assembly, the hallway was buzzing with students excitedly talking about the awards. Jamal stood off to the side, still holding the certificate in his hand, when he saw a familiar face. Ray. His father. Jamal's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected to see him, not here, not now. Ray stood at the far end of the hall, leaning against the wall, looking out of place in a button-up shirt that wasn't quite his style. "Jamal," his dad said, as if they had just bumped into each other casually. "Got your award, huh?" Jamal swallowed hard. "Yeah," he muttered, trying to hide the anger rising in him. "The hurt. Where've you been?" Ray looked away for a moment, then back at Jamal. There was an awkward pause, a silence that stretched too long. "I've been around. Had to get some things sorted. You know how it is." Jamal's jaw clenched. "No, I don't know how it is. You're never around. You say you're gonna change, but it's just talk. I don't need your excuses." Ray's face tightened, but there was a flicker of something, regret, maybe, in his eyes. But he didn't apologize. He never did. "I'm here now," Ray said. "That's what matters, right?" Jamal shook his head, unable to hold back the frustration building inside him. "No, that's not what matters. What matters is whether you're actually here, or if you're just showing up for a second to say you did." There was another long silence. Ray didn't answer. Instead, he looked away, avoiding his son's gaze. "Look, Jamal," Ray began, his voice quiet. "I don't know how to fix things. But I'm trying. I want you to know that. Jamal took a step back, holding the certificate tightly in his hand. He felt like the whole world was pressing down on him, but he couldn't let it crush him. Not this time. I don't need your words, Jamal said. I need you to show up. For real. Without another word, Jamal turned and walked away. He didn't look back. As he walked down the hall, he realized something: he didn't need his father's approval. He didn't need anyone's approval. Not really. The only approval he needed was his own. The days after the assembly were a blur. Jamal had hoped that receiving the award would bring a sense of relief or pride. Instead, it only made the weight of everything else feel heavier. His father's brief, empty apology lingered in his mind, like a wound that hadn't quite healed. And his mom's absence, the constant cycle of work and silence, gnawed at him in a way that left him feeling hollow. For a while, it felt like nothing in his life had changed. He still woke up early, grabbed whatever breakfast he could manage, and went through the motions of school. He still picked Ava up from school, made sure she did her homework, and went to bed with the nagging sense that something wasn't quite right. But the smallest things kept adding up, weighing down on him in ways he couldn't ignore. Every time he stepped into Ms. Anderson's class, he felt like a fraud. He'd worked hard for his grades, but the praise she gave him, it felt like it wasn't entirely his. She believed in him, yes, but he wasn't sure he believed in himself. He wasn't sure who he was outside of the student trying to get by, outside of the son trying to hold a broken family together. It wasn't until he was sitting in the lunchroom a few days later that everything came crashing down. It was just another day. Jamal sat with a small group of friends, none of them particularly close, but they had become his corner of normal. He watched as they joked and laughed, throwing casual insults and pulling out their phones to show off pictures from the weekend. It was supposed to be simple, to let him breathe for a moment. But Jamal couldn't escape the growing discomfort he felt. It wasn't the lunchroom that bothered him, it was everything outside of it. Yo, Jamal, one of his friends, Marcus, called from the other side of the table, breaking him from his thoughts. You coming to the game tonight? Everyone's going. Jamal blinked, confused for a second. He hadn't even realized there was a game. Basketball, probably, it was the only sport the school cared about. But he hadn't been paying attention to that. He hadn't been paying attention to anything outside of getting through the day. I don't know, Jamal mumbled. He wasn't interested in a basketball game. He was interested in surviving another day. Maybe. Marcus raised an eyebrow, sensing the hesitation. Come on, man. You deserve a break. You've been all about your grades lately, but you gotta have some fun too, right? Jamal shifted uncomfortably in his seat, feeling the weight of his thoughts press down on him. He wasn't sure if he was tired or just done. Done with pretending that everything was fine, done with trying to live up to everyone's expectations, done with the lie he'd been telling himself. I think I'll pass, he finally said, forcing a half smile. Got stuff to do. The others shrugged, moving on to their next topic of conversation. But Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that something inside him was cracking, a part of him he'd been trying to ignore for so long. It was the same feeling he had after receiving the award. Recognition was supposed to feel good, but it didn't. It felt like a reminder that he was still trying to prove something, still struggling with who he was. Later that evening, Jamal found himself back at home, sitting in the dimly lit living room, alone except for Ava who was doing her homework at the kitchen table. The TV was on, but Jamal wasn't really watching it. His mind was too full, too heavy. His phone buzzed on the coffee table. He glanced at it and saw a message from Ms. Anderson. Jamal, I know you've been working hard, but I can tell you're holding something back. I want to talk. Please come by my office after school tomorrow. Jamal stared at the message for a long moment, uncertain. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to brush it off like he always did when people tried to help him. But another part of him, a part he hadn't heard in a long time, wanted to see what Ms. Anderson had to say. Maybe she saw something in him that he hadn't been able to see himself. The next day, he showed up at her office. Ms. Anderson's office was quiet, as always. The soft hum of the fluorescent lights above them filled the silence as Jamal sat down in the chair across from her desk. She smiled at him, a warm but knowing smile that made Jamal feel both seen and vulnerable at the same time. "Jamal, I'm glad you came," she said gently, her voice a calming presence in the small room. "I know things haven't been easy for you, but I also know you're capable of so much more. You've shown me that this year." Jamal shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He wasn't sure if he wanted to hear this. He wasn't sure if he could handle hearing how much potential he had when he didn't even know who he was anymore. "I'm not sure what you mean," Jamal replied, his voice low. "I've just been doing what I need to do to get by." Ms. Anderson leaned forward slightly, her eyes kind but firm. "You've been doing more than that, Jamal. I know you're carrying a lot on your shoulders, but I also know that you're scared. You're scared of what might happen if you start believing in yourself." Jamal stared at her, his breath caught in his chest. It was as if she could see right through him, like she knew the things he'd kept buried deep down. He wanted to deny it, to say that she was wrong. But instead, the words came out of him in a rush. "I don't know who I'm supposed to be anymore," he admitted, the rawness of his own voice surprising him. "I'm trying to be this person that everyone wants me to be, but I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can keep pretending that everything's fine." Ms. Anderson sat back in her chair, giving him space to breathe. "Jamal, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have it all figured out right now. What matters is that you take one step forward. That you trust yourself, even if it's hard. Because you are worthy of all of it." Jamal let out a shaky breath, feeling something shift inside him. It wasn't a magic fix. There wasn't a simple solution to everything that was weighing on him. But for the first time, he felt like maybe he could take that first step. Maybe he could trust himself enough to keep going. "I'm scared," Jamal whispered. "Good," Ms. Anderson replied with a soft smile. "Being scared means you care. And that's where real growth begins." Jamal left her office that day feeling different, not fixed, but freer. For the first time, he realized that his identity wasn't something that could be handed to him. It was something he had to build, piece by piece, starting with one decision at a time. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to keep running away from who he was. It was time to stop pretending. The days after his conversation with Ms. Anderson felt like a small but significant shift in Jamal's life. He wasn't magically transformed, and things didn't suddenly become easy. But the weight that had been pressing on his chest for so long, the uncertainty that had clouded his every move, began to dissipate, even if only slightly. It was still hard. Hard to push through the daily grind of school, family responsibilities, and the constant reminder that life wasn't going to hand him anything. But Jamal was starting to realize that maybe he didn't want things handed to him anymore. Maybe it was time to take what he deserved. The moment of truth came during his math test the following week. Ms. Anderson had made it clear that she expected him to keep improving, to keep pushing himself. The grades weren't the issue anymore, it was about his attitude, his drive, and whether he was truly committed to turning his life around. Jamal had never been one to back down from a challenge, but this time felt different. This time, he had something to prove. It was a Friday morning, and Jamal sat at his desk in the back of the classroom, staring at the test in front of him. The questions seemed straightforward, but his mind kept drifting to the things that had nothing to do with algebra or geometry. His mom's late-night shifts, the empty space where his father should have been, and the weight of his responsibilities at home, all of it tangled in his thoughts. He took a deep breath, shaking his head to clear it. This wasn't the time for distractions. He couldn't afford them. Not now, not when he was finally starting to feel like he might actually be able to do something with his life. He bent over the test and began to write. 30 minutes later, Jamal was halfway through the test, the last few problems hanging over him like a shadow. The pressure was mounting. His pen hovered over the final question when Ms. Anderson made her way to his desk, her footsteps quiet but deliberate. "Jamal," she said, her voice soft, "how are you doing?" Jamal looked up, startled for a moment before realizing it was just Ms. Anderson. He forced a smile, trying to hide the tension in his shoulders. "I'm good. Just, trying to finish." Ms. Anderson nodded, giving him a knowing look. "You've come a long way, you know that?" Jamal's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't used to this kind of encouragement. "Thanks," he said, feeling a little embarrassed. "I'm trying." She stood there for a moment longer, watching him, before moving on to the next student. Jamal could still feel her eyes on him, her belief in him a quiet presence that lingered in the back of his mind. By the time the bell rang, Jamal had finished the test, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. It wasn't perfect, but it was his best effort. That, at least, was something. The next few days felt like a blur. The test results came back quickly, and Jamal's stomach turned when he saw the grade at the top of his paper, an 88%. It wasn't the highest score in the class, but it was the best he had ever done on a test like that. He could feel a wave of pride wash over him, but it was quickly followed by a gnawing feeling that he wasn't done yet. He wasn't finished. The day he received the results, Ms. Anderson stopped him after class. "Jamal, I've got to say, I'm impressed. An 88% is a huge improvement. You should be proud of yourself." Jamal nodded, but there was still something nagging at him. He didn't feel like it was enough. "I'm glad, but I can do better," he said, his voice steady but firm. Ms. Anderson's expression softened, and she gave him a small, knowing smile. "I have no doubt. Just remember, this is about progress, not perfection. Keep pushing yourself, Jamal. And when you're ready, I'll be here to help." For the first time in a long time, Jamal realized how much he had been running from himself, from his own potential, from his own future. He wasn't going to settle for just getting by anymore. It was time to stop being afraid of success. It was time to claim it. But the road ahead wasn't easy. The following week, Jamal faced his first real test of his commitment when he received a call from Ava's school. The principal's voice was tight, strained, and Jamal immediately knew something was wrong. "Ava's been having some trouble in class," the principal explained. "She's been acting out lately. I think you need to come in for a meeting." Jamal felt his stomach tighten. Ava had always been quiet, keeping to herself at school. The thought that she was now acting out unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. He knew how much she looked up to him, how much she depended on him to keep things together. But what could he do if he couldn't even keep it together for himself? He walked to the school that afternoon, his mind racing. As he sat in the principal's office, Ava sat beside him, her small hands folded in her lap. She wasn't making eye contact with anyone. Her eyes were downcast, her shoulders hunched. The principal explained that Ava had been getting into trouble for not following instructions, for refusing to do her assignments. Jamal could see the tension in her face, the fear of being caught, the same fear he felt when he was younger and tried to hide his failures. "Ava," Jamal said gently, trying to keep his voice steady, "what's going on?" She didn't respond right away, but after a moment, she whispered, "I don't want to be like you." Jamal's heart sank. He didn't know what to say. He hadn't realized the impact his own struggles had on her. He'd been so focused on his own survival that he hadn't seen how deeply his actions affected her. "Ava," Jamal started, but he didn't know how to finish. What could he say? The principal spoke then, her voice calm but firm. "Ava needs to understand that her actions, like yours, have consequences. And she needs someone who can show her how to make better choices. We're not here to punish her, but to help her. Do you think you could work with her on this, Jamal?" The question hung in the air like a weight. Jamal felt the burden of it settle on his shoulders. He wasn't just fighting for his own future anymore. He was fighting for hers, too. "I'll work with her," Jamal said, his voice stronger than he felt. "I'll make sure she understands. I won't let her go down the same path I did." As they left the principal's office, Ava walked silently beside him. Jamal felt the weight of his responsibility, but also a strange sense of purpose. He was finally starting to understand what it meant to fight for something greater than himself. The weeks that followed were a struggle. Jamal worked with Ava every night, helping her with her homework and trying to get her to open up about her feelings. It wasn't easy, and sometimes he felt like he was failing her just as much as he was trying to help her. But little by little, he saw changes, small victories that reminded him that progress didn't always come in giant leaps. It was the steady, consistent work that made the difference. And just as he had with his own life, Jamal began to realize that he couldn't keep running from the challenges ahead. The road was going to be hard, but he was ready for it. He had a family to take care of, a future to build, and a belief in himself that was slowly but surely taking root. Jamal stood in the hallway, the sound of students rushing past him as the bell rang in the distance. He had a rare moment of quiet, just long enough to catch his breath before his next class. But his mind was far from the equations he'd been learning in geometry or the history lesson he'd half-heartedly skimmed through earlier. No, his thoughts kept returning to one thing, one person, really, Ava. It had been a few weeks since their meeting with the principal, and while things weren't perfect, there was a shift in the air. Ava had started to open up to him, just a little. Every night, Jamal would sit down with her at the kitchen table, helping her with her homework, asking her how her day went. Slowly, she'd started to speak more, to trust him more. It wasn't a smooth process, but Jamal had begun to see the smallest of changes in her, a brighter smile when she succeeded on a math problem, a less anxious fidgeting when she had to speak in class. And for the first time in a long while, Jamal felt like he wasn't alone in this struggle. She was with him, in her own way, and he had to admit, it felt good. The breakthrough didn't come all at once. Instead, it arrived slowly, in the form of a simple conversation. It was a Thursday evening when Ava came into the living room, holding a crumpled piece of paper in her hand. She looked uncertain, hesitant even. Jamal had been in the middle of reading his textbook, preparing for an upcoming test, but when he saw the look on her face, he set the book aside. "What's up, Ava?" he asked, his voice calm, encouraging. Ava took a deep breath and handed him the paper. It was a note from her teacher, Ms. Thompson, praising Ava for her recent improvement in class. Her grades had started to rise, and even though she hadn't yet fully embraced the process, Jamal could see that she was gaining confidence. This note, written in blue ink with a smiley face drawn at the bottom, was proof of that. Jamal scanned the paper, his eyes flicking to the words. "Wow, this is great, Ava. Ms. Thompson is impressed with you. It's a big deal." Ava shifted nervously. "I didn't think I'd get a note like this. I've been trying, but I don't know if I'm doing enough." Jamal smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "You are doing enough. You've been working hard, and it's showing. This is just the beginning, you know. You can keep going, keep getting better." Ava bit her lip, then asked quietly, "Do you think I can really do it, Jamal? Do you think I can be better than you?" The question struck Jamal like a punch to the gut. He hadn't expected it, and for a moment, he didn't know how to answer. Ava had always looked up to him, but now, there was a subtle shift. She wasn't asking to follow in his footsteps, she was asking to blaze her own trail, and she was seeking his approval, his belief in her. He reached out, taking her hand in his. "Ava, you're not trying to be better than anyone. You're trying to be the best you can be. And I believe in you. You don't have to be like me, you just have to be you." Ava's eyes softened, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled. "Thanks, Jamal. It wasn't much, but it was everything." Jamal realized in that moment that the path he was walking, the fight he was fighting, wasn't just about him anymore. He had to push forward, not just for his own future, but for Ava's too. And the realization was empowering. He wasn't just a big brother trying to hold it together, he was becoming the person he'd always wanted to be. Someone strong enough to guide not just himself, but the people he loved. The next day at school, Jamal found himself walking with a lighter step, his mind focused on what Ava had said. He wasn't sure why it had hit him so hard, why it felt like such a monumental shift in his life. Maybe it was because he had spent so much time trying to fix things for her that he'd never stopped to realize that she was already starting to fix herself. And then there was school. The upcoming test in chemistry loomed over him like an enormous storm cloud. Despite his best efforts to prepare, he couldn't shake the fear of failure. But this time, he didn't feel like he was failing for the same reasons he used to. He wasn't doing this for someone else's approval. He wasn't doing it because it was expected of him. This time, he was doing it for himself. And that realization made all the difference. When Ms. Anderson handed the test back a few days later, Jamal's hands trembled slightly as he took the paper from her. He didn't want to look at it, didn't want to face whatever number was at the top. But when he saw the grade, he couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. An 85%. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even his best score, but it was the first time he had earned something without feeling like he had to fight for someone else's approval. He had done it for himself. As Ms. Anderson walked by, she paused and glanced at his paper. "Nice work, Jamal. Keep it up. I know you've got even more in you." He nodded, a sense of accomplishment settling over him like a warm blanket. He hadn't just proven something to her. He had proven something to himself. That afternoon, Jamal walked home with Ava, who had a bounce in her step as they approached the front door. She was holding another note from her teacher, this one even more enthusiastic than the last. Jamal couldn't help but smile as she showed it to him, her face lighting up with pride. "I think I'm finally getting it," Ava said, her voice full of wonder. "Maybe I can do more than I thought." Jamal glanced down at her, his heart swelling. "You can do anything, Ava. Just keep believing in yourself." Ava's smile widened, and for the first time, Jamal felt a true sense of relief. Things weren't perfect, far from it, but they were improving. And that was enough. Later that evening, Jamal sat at the kitchen table, thinking about everything that had happened over the past few months. He hadn't fully realized how far he had come until now. From the boy who had felt lost and overwhelmed, to the young man who was now seeing his own potential, even when it felt like the world was against him. He wasn't perfect. He still had plenty to learn. But Jamal had made it this far by learning to trust himself, by choosing to take control of his life rather than let it control him. And in doing so, he had started to create a future he could be proud of, not just for him, but for Ava, too. There was still a long road ahead. But for the first time, Jamal believed that he was ready for whatever came next. The days after Jamal's breakthrough were filled with a quiet confidence. He had finally begun to see the fruits of his labor. Not only had his grades started to improve, but his relationship with Ava had also grown stronger. He found himself waking up each day with a sense of purpose, his mind clear and focused. Things were looking up. But as anyone who had ever tried to change their life knew, progress was never a straight line. Life had a way of throwing curveballs, and it wasn't long before Jamal found himself facing his biggest challenge yet. It started on a Wednesday afternoon when he was walking home from school, a heavy backpack slung over his shoulder. The sun was setting, casting a soft orange glow across the neighborhood, but instead of feeling peaceful, the weight of the evening loomed over him. As he turned the corner near his house, he noticed a group of students gathered around something, or someone, at the end of the street. Jamal's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the figure in the middle of the group. It was Chris. Chris, one of the kids from his old neighborhood, had always been trouble. Back when Jamal was still hanging around with the wrong crowd, Chris had been one of his closest friends. But when Jamal started to change, when he began to make an effort to turn his life around, Chris had been one of the first people to make it clear that he didn't think Jamal could change. He'd laughed at Jamal for trying to focus on his schoolwork, mocked him for even thinking about a future beyond their small corner of the world. And now, here Chris was, standing at the center of the group, his arms crossed, his face twisted in a smirk. The other students laughed and joked around him, but Jamal could see that the energy was off. Something was happening, and he knew it wasn't good. As Jamal got closer, one of the kids from the group, Tyrone, called out to him. "Yo, Jamal. You better come over here. Chris wants to talk to you." Jamal's gut clenched. He didn't want to go over there. Not now. Not when he was so close to proving to himself that he could walk a different path. But he couldn't ignore the invitation, especially not with the way Tyrone said it. Jamal had been avoiding situations like this for months, but he could feel the pull of his old life calling to him. With a deep breath, Jamal approached the group, trying to calm the racing thoughts in his head. As he drew closer, Chris shot him a cold, challenging look. "Well, look who decided to show up," Chris said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The new and improved Jamal. The guy who thinks he's too good for us now." Jamal felt a knot form in his stomach. He wasn't in the mood for this. Not today. But the anger bubbling up inside of him wasn't the same kind of anger that used to rule him. It was different. He was different. "I'm not too good for anyone, Chris," Jamal said, keeping his voice steady. "I'm just trying to do better. I'm not here to start trouble." Chris snorted. "Do better? Man, you're nothing without us. You think you can just walk away from who you really are? You think you can change and leave all this behind?" The words hit Jamal harder than he expected. He could feel the old familiar pull of doubt creeping in, the part of him that still believed that maybe, just maybe, he couldn't escape who he had been. But he shook his head, trying to fight back the voices in his head. "I'm not leaving anything behind, Chris. I'm just moving forward," Jamal said, his voice firm now. "And I don't need you to pull me back." For a moment, there was silence. Chris's eyes narrowed as he sized Jamal up, looking for a weakness. But Jamal stood his ground. He wasn't the same person he used to be. Not anymore. "You think you're too good for this?" Chris said, his voice low. "Let me tell you something, man. Life doesn't get easier. You can try to hide behind your books and your grades, but the world will always pull you back down. People like you and me, Jamal, we don't get out." The words stung, but Jamal didn't let them show on his face. He had heard this before, from people who didn't believe in themselves, let alone in him. But Jamal wasn't one of those people anymore. "Maybe the world is tough, Chris. But I don't have to let it drag me down," Jamal said, taking a step closer to him. "I'm going to make my own way. And if you want to stay stuck, that's on you. But I'm not giving up." Chris's smirk faltered for a second, and the group fell silent. Jamal could feel the weight of their stares, the tension in the air. He didn't know what he expected from this encounter, but standing there, face to face with Chris, he realized that it didn't matter. He wasn't going to let anyone, no matter how familiar, pull him back into the life he was working so hard to escape. Finally, Chris shrugged and turned away, dismissing Jamal with a wave of his hand. "Whatever, man. Do what you gotta do. But don't say I didn't warn you." Jamal watched him walk away, his mind racing. The encounter had been harder than he expected, but at the same time, it had felt like a victory. He hadn't let Chris pull him down. He hadn't let the past drag him back into the shadows. As Jamal walked home, the weight of the confrontation still lingered, but now it felt lighter. The doubt that had crept in for a moment was gone, replaced by something stronger, conviction. He wasn't going to let anyone, or anything, stop him from moving forward. That night, as Jamal sat at the kitchen table, working on his homework, he couldn't help but think about what had happened. He had faced Chris, and he had stood his ground. It wasn't just about the words they had exchanged, it was about the decision he had made. The decision to keep going, no matter what. And as he thought about his mom, about Ava, about everything that was on the line, he realized something important. There would always be people who tried to pull him down, who would try to remind him of who he used to be. But it was up to him whether he listened to them or not. For the first time, Jamal understood that the hardest part of his journey wasn't just about the choices he made, it was about the strength it took to ignore the distractions and the doubts. It was about choosing to believe in himself, even when others didn't. And as he looked out the window at the darkening sky, Jamal felt ready. Ready for whatever came next. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The air was thick with tension as Jamal sat in the small corner of the school library, his textbook spread out before him. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, but the noise felt distant, like it was part of a world he no longer felt connected to. He had been coming here every day after school, hoping to find some peace, some clarity amidst the chaos that was his life. But today, something felt different. Something was about to change. It was the day after the confrontation with Chris, and Jamal had spent the night replaying every word, every look, in his mind. But as time passed, the sting began to fade. He'd stood his ground. He hadn't backed down. He had walked away from the past with his head held high. But now, he was standing at a crossroads, and the weight of the decision ahead of him pressed down harder than any test or confrontation he had faced before. His phone buzzed on the table, snapping him out of his thoughts. He glanced at the screen, an incoming message from Ava. Ava, hey, Jamal, do you have a minute? We need to talk. His heart skipped a beat. He couldn't ignore the concern in her message. Ever since he had started helping her with schoolwork and working to improve their relationship, there had been an unspoken understanding between them. But something about this text felt different. It felt urgent. Jamal quickly typed back. Jamal, what's going on? Ava, it's about school. I think I made a mistake. I don't know how to fix it. Jamal's stomach dropped. He had seen Ava struggling, trying to keep up with the expectations everyone placed on her, on them both, but they had come so far. He couldn't bear to think that all their progress might be in jeopardy. He grabbed his backpack, shoved his phone into his pocket, and stood up. The hallway outside the library felt unusually empty as Jamal made his way toward the exit. The school's clock tower chimed, marking the hour, but to Jamal, it felt like the sound of time ticking away, as if everything was moving too quickly for him to catch up. By the time Jamal reached home, the air felt heavy, thick with the silence of an impending storm. He walked into the house to find Ava sitting at the kitchen table, her hands nervously wringing a piece of paper. Her eyes were downcast, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't have that faint spark of determination in her gaze. Ava? Jamal asked softly, walking over to her. What's going on? Ava didn't look up right away. Instead, she took a deep breath, her fingers clutching the paper tighter. When she finally raised her head, her face was a mask of uncertainty and fear. I messed up, Jamal, Ava said, her voice trembling. I got into trouble at school today. Ms. Thompson called me out in front of the class for cheating on the last test. She said I could be expelled. Jamal's heart stopped. Cheating? Ava, what? Why? Ava's lips trembled as she tried to explain. I didn't mean to. I wasn't trying to cheat. I just couldn't keep up with the work. I was struggling, and I saw the answers on someone else's paper, and I copied them. I didn't think it would be a big deal. But then Ms. Thompson caught me, and she said that I was in serious trouble. She said if I didn't tell the truth, she might have to report me to the principal. Jamal's mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Ava had been under so much pressure lately, trying to fit in and keep up with her schoolwork while facing the weight of their situation at home. Jamal knew how much she hated disappointing people, especially their mom. She'd never wanted to let anyone down. But the reality of what she had done, the consequences it might have on her future, it was a lot for a girl so young to carry. He pulled out a chair and sat down beside her, trying to steady his breath. Ava, you didn't have to do that. You're not alone in this. You don't have to pretend you've got it all figured out. We can figure this out together. Ava shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. I didn't want you to be disappointed in me. I didn't want to ruin everything we've been working for. Jamal reached over and gently took her hand, his grip firm but comforting. Ava, listen to me. You've already been through so much, and none of that has to define you. We've all made mistakes, but that's not what matters. What matters is how we fix it. We face it head-on. We learn from it. The weight in the room felt a little lighter after Jamal spoke. Ava wiped her tears, nodding slowly. I'll talk to Ms. Thompson tomorrow. I'll tell her the truth. I just don't know what will happen. I'll be there with you, Jamal said. We'll handle this together. The next day, as Jamal stood beside Ava in front of Ms. Thompson's desk, he felt the tension in his chest return. It wasn't just about Ava anymore. It was about what came next for both of them. Jamal knew that this was the moment, the decision that would either keep them on their current path or pull them in a completely different direction. Ms. Thompson's expression softened as they spoke, listening to Ava's honest admission of what had happened. She didn't immediately reprimand her. Instead, she explained that cheating was serious, but it wasn't the end. Ms. Thompson agreed to let Ava make up the work she had missed, but the matter would still go on her permanent record. Jamal could feel the tension drain from his body as they left the principal's office. Ava had done the right thing. She had owned up to her mistake, and although the consequences weren't small, it wasn't the disaster they'd feared. But as they walked home that afternoon, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between them. It wasn't just about the incident, it was about the realization that, even though they were trying to do things right, the world still threw curveballs their way. Sometimes, no matter how hard you try, you don't always have control over everything. And that was the hardest lesson Jamal had to learn. Later that night, Jamal sat in his room, staring at the homework spread out before him. The pages blurred together, the numbers and formulas dancing on the page, but his mind wasn't on his studies anymore. He couldn't help but think of the crossroads ahead. Ava's mistake had forced him to confront the hard truth. No matter how much effort he put in, no matter how much he helped Ava, he couldn't control everything. The future was still uncertain. But maybe that was okay. Jamal had a choice to make. He could either continue to walk the path he had carved out for himself, despite the obstacles, despite the uncertainty. Or he could let fear, doubt, and the unexpected twists of life control him. The choice was clear. Jamal wasn't going to back down. He was going to keep moving forward, one step at a time. For him. For Ava. For the future they both deserved. And no matter what came next, Jamal knew he wasn't alone anymore. The morning sun spilled through the cracks in the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. Jamal sat at his desk, his fingers hovering over the keyboard, the glow of the screen illuminating his face. His mind felt foggy, distracted by everything that had been happening recently, the argument with Chris, Ava's trouble at school, the weight of their future pressing down on him. It had been a few days since they had managed to patch things up with Ms. Thompson, and things had returned to a strange semblance of normalcy. Ava was back to studying hard, determined to prove that her mistake was just a bump in the road, not a reflection of who she truly was. And Jamal? He had tried to refocus on his own journey, his education, his goals. But despite the calm, something felt off. He couldn't shake the feeling that a storm was brewing, one that would shake everything he had worked for. That morning, as he sat in his room trying to finish an essay, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Mr. Davis, his guidance counselor. Jamal had always kept a bit of distance from Mr. Davis, mostly because he wasn't sure how to approach the man, and because, frankly, he didn't think anyone could help him anymore. But this message made him pause. "Mr. Davis, Jamal, can you meet with me this afternoon? I have an opportunity that I think might be a good fit for you." The message was vague, but there was something in the tone that made Jamal's stomach tighten. He wasn't sure if he was ready for another conversation about his future, he had enough of those lately. But he knew he couldn't ignore it. Not when things seemed to be shifting in ways he didn't understand. He sent a quick reply, agreeing to meet after school. The following afternoon, Jamal made his way to Mr. Davis's office, located at the far end of the school building. He had walked down this hallway 1,000 times but never paid attention to the rooms lining the walls. Today, everything felt different. He was moving towards something, but what that something was, he wasn't sure. When he knocked and entered Mr. Davis's office, he was greeted with a warm smile. The counselor's office was smaller than Jamal expected, with stacks of papers and college brochures scattered across the desk. A poster on the wall read, "Your future is what you make of it." Jamal. "Thanks for coming in, Mr. Davis said, gesturing for him to sit down. "I know things have been a bit crazy for you lately, but I wanted to talk to you about a potential opportunity." Jamal sat down cautiously. He wasn't sure what to expect. "I've been keeping an eye on your progress," Mr. Davis continued, pulling out a folder and sliding it toward Jamal. "You've made some significant strides this semester. Your grades are looking better, and I think you've got potential." Jamal's brow furrowed. "Thanks, but what does that have to do with an opportunity?" Mr. Davis smiled. "I'm glad you asked. There's an internship program that I think would be a perfect fit for you. It's with a local community organization that helps at-risk youth. They're looking for someone with leadership potential, someone who can relate to the kids and help them with schoolwork, mentorship, and personal development." Jamal's heart skipped a beat. The idea of mentorship, of helping others, was something he had considered before, but hearing it from Mr. Davis, in such a concrete way, made it feel real. This wasn't just some vague idea. It was an opportunity to make a difference, to step into the kind of future he had always imagined for himself but wasn't sure how to achieve. "You think I'd be a good fit for that?" Jamal asked, his voice tinged with doubt. Mr. Davis leaned forward, looking him straight in the eye. "Jamal, I think you've got a gift. You've been through a lot, and you're at a point now where you can either choose to keep pushing forward or you can get stuck. This internship could give you the experience and exposure to help you take that next step, whether it's applying to college, looking for other opportunities, or just figuring out what comes next. It's a chance to prove to yourself that you've got what it takes." Jamal sat back in his chair, his mind racing. The weight of the decision pressed heavily on his shoulders. On one hand, this was the opportunity he'd been waiting for, a chance to not only change his own life but to help others do the same. But on the other hand, he wasn't sure he was ready for something so big, something so public. What if he failed? What if, just like everything else, it didn't work out? But then he thought about Ava, about how far she'd come despite her setbacks. She hadn't let her mistakes define her, and neither could he. "I'll do it," Jamal said, surprising even himself with the conviction in his voice. Mr. Davis's smile widened. "That's what I like to hear. I'll send over the application materials. You'll have to attend a few orientation sessions, but I think you're going to do great. This is your chance to step up." The following weeks flew by in a blur of meetings, papers, and preparation. Jamal dedicated himself to the internship, throwing himself into the work with the same energy he had once poured into avoiding trouble. He found himself mentoring younger students, listening to their struggles, and guiding them through their own challenges. It was harder than he expected, seeing the rawness of their lives and the way they were just trying to survive in a world that often seemed indifferent to them. But there was something incredibly rewarding about it, something that made Jamal feel like he was finally doing what he was meant to do. For the first time, he understood what it meant to lead, not by force, but by example. And as he worked with the kids, he began to realize that this wasn't just about helping them. It was helping him, too. One afternoon, after a particularly tough session with a group of struggling students, Jamal sat down alone on the steps outside the community center. He was exhausted, physically and emotionally, but there was a deep sense of fulfillment inside him. He had been pushed to his limits, and yet, in a strange way, it was the most alive he had ever felt. His phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Ava. "Ava, you're doing amazing, Jamal. I'm so proud of you. You're already making a difference." Jamal smiled at the message, feeling the warmth of her words fill him with a sense of pride. Maybe this was the turning point he had been waiting for. Maybe, just maybe, he was finally heading in the right direction. That night, as he lay in bed reflecting on the day, Jamal thought about how far he had come. He had faced his demons, his past, his doubts, and his fears. But in doing so, he had uncovered something bigger than himself, a purpose. He wasn't just doing this for him anymore. He was doing it for everyone who had ever felt like they didn't belong, for everyone who had struggled to find their way. Jamal had always known that he wanted to change the world, but now he realized that the world didn't have to be some big, abstract idea. It started right here, with one person, one decision at a time. Tomorrow, he would continue his work. He would keep pushing forward. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, Jamal knew he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The weeks of Jamal's internship seemed to stretch on endlessly, each day blending into the next. The mornings were filled with lectures and workshops, and the afternoons were dedicated to working directly with the kids in the program. It wasn't easy. The kids came from all walks of life, some from broken homes, others dealing with mental health struggles, and a few just trying to navigate a system that felt stacked against them. At first, Jamal had been eager, confident that he could make an impact. He had a way with words, a natural empathy that allowed him to connect with them, but nothing had prepared him for how deeply their struggles would affect him. It was one thing to mentor someone from a place of understanding. It was another to realize that their pain was a reflection of a much larger societal issue. One afternoon, Jamal sat in a small, dimly lit room with a group of kids who had been struggling to stay focused in school. They were sitting in a circle, and Jamal was supposed to facilitate a study session, but no one was paying attention. Some were doodling on their notebooks, others were talking in hushed tones. Jamal had tried everything, stories, motivational talks, even asking them about their dreams, but nothing seemed to get through. Then there was Danny, a 14-year-old who had been part of the program for several months. He was quiet, withdrawn, and angry. Danny's eyes often avoided Jamal's gaze, and he never spoke unless asked a direct question. His grades were slipping, his behavior at school was increasingly erratic, and his attitude toward authority was rebellious, to say the least. "Danny," Jamal said, trying to catch his attention. "Can we talk for a second?" Danny didn't respond, but Jamal could see his jaw tighten. There was something behind those eyes, a wall that Jamal had been trying to break through since he first met him. After a few moments of silence, Jamal walked over to him, taking a seat beside the boy. "Listen, I know you don't want to be here right now. I know this whole thing probably feels pointless. But trust me, I've been where you are. I've felt like the world was against me. Like nothing mattered." Danny shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his arms crossed over his chest. "What do you know about it? You're not like me. You don't get it." Jamal looked at him, his heart pounding. He had heard that before, he wasn't like them. People said it to him all the time, like his story somehow didn't count. But the truth was, it did. He had lived through the same struggles, the same anger, the same hopelessness. "I get it more than you think," Jamal said, his voice steady but firm. "I know what it's like to feel like you're invisible. Like no one cares what happens to you. But here's the thing, I didn't let that stop me. I fought through it. I'm still fighting. And you can too. Danny didn't respond right away, but Jamal could see that the words had landed. For the first time, Danny's eyes softened slightly, as if he were considering the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of the mess he felt trapped in. But before Jamal could say more, another voice interrupted. Jamal. It was Tanya, one of the other mentors in the program, calling from the doorway. She was holding a folder, her face strained with concern. Can you come here for a second? I need to talk to you. Jamal glanced at Danny one last time before standing up. I'll be right back, he said, and followed Tanya into the hallway. As soon as they were out of earshot of the kids, Tanya's expression shifted from concern to frustrated. You need to watch yourself, Jamal, she said, her tone sharp. You're getting too emotionally invested in these kids. It's important to help them, but you're putting yourself in a vulnerable spot. You can't save everyone. Jamal felt a lump form in his throat. He had been warned about this before, the emotional toll of mentoring. But hearing it from Tanya, someone who had been in the program longer, hit harder than he expected. Was he really doing more harm than good? Was he too involved, too close to the kids, to be effective? I know what I'm doing, Jamal said, trying to keep his voice steady. These kids need someone who cares. They need to know that they're not invisible, that they matter. Tanya sighed, rubbing her forehead. I get that, Jamal. I really do. But you need to protect yourself too. If you let yourself get too emotionally invested, you'll burn out, and that's the last thing they need. Jamal nodded slowly, but inside, a storm was raging. He understood what Tanya was saying, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was just beginning to break through to these kids. He couldn't walk away now, not when he was this close. Later that night, as Jamal lay in bed, the weight of Tanya's words lingered in his mind. He had always been someone who wore his heart on his sleeve, who wanted to help everyone, but maybe she was right. Maybe he needed to put up a wall around himself, to keep from getting hurt. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that the wall wasn't the answer. For years, Jamal had built walls around himself to protect his heart, to shield himself from the pain of his past. But now, as he worked with these kids, he realized that walls only kept people out, they didn't protect anyone from the real dangers of life. Jamal didn't want to live his life behind walls anymore. He didn't want to be afraid to feel, to care, or to help. He had already been hurt, but he couldn't let that stop him from being the person he knew he could be, the person these kids needed him to be. The next morning, Jamal showed up at the community center earlier than usual. As he walked in, he was greeted by the familiar sounds of kids laughing and talking. But today, something felt different. He was different. He made his way to the study room, where the kids were waiting. Danny was there too, sitting in his usual spot. Jamal walked over to him and sat down, feeling a new sense of purpose settle in his chest. Danny, Jamal said, his voice calm but resolute, I'm not going to give up on you. You don't have to be alone in this. Danny looked up at him, his expression unreadable. For a moment, there was silence. Then, Danny spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Maybe you're right. Jamal smiled. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And in that moment, he realized something, he wasn't just breaking through the walls of these kids. He was breaking through his own walls too. The weight of the internship had begun to settle heavily on Jamal's shoulders. What had started as an exciting opportunity to make a difference was now a daily grind, testing his limits and challenging his resolve. He had always prided himself on his ability to juggle multiple responsibilities, school, family, and now the internship. But lately, the balance was tipping. His grades were slipping again, and he found himself staying up late, trying to catch up on assignments he had neglected. Ava had noticed the change too. She had stopped by his room the other night, concern etched on her face. "Jamal, you're burning the candle at both ends," she had said softly. "You need to take care of yourself." But Jamal had brushed her off. He couldn't afford to slow down now. Not when he was so close to something that could change everything. The turning point came one afternoon when he received a call from his mother. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Jamal, your father's in the hospital. It's serious." His heart sank. He hadn't spoken to his father in years, not since the fallout that had driven them apart. But now, the past didn't matter. He needed to be there. He rushed to the hospital, his mind racing. When he arrived, he found his father unconscious, hooked up to machines. The sight was overwhelming. He had always blamed his father for their broken family, but now, standing there, he realized that blame hadn't healed anything. It hadn't brought them closer. It hadn't fixed the damage. For the first time, Jamal allowed himself to feel the weight of his own anger and hurt. He had built walls around himself to protect against the pain, but those walls had also kept him from healing. As he sat by his father's side, he made a silent vow to let go of the past, to stop letting it control him. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he couldn't move forward until he confronted the ghosts that had haunted him for so long. The next day, he returned to the community center, his mind clearer than it had been in weeks. He met with Danny, who had been struggling to stay engaged in the program. "Hey, Danny," Jamal said, his voice steady. "I know things have been tough. But you're not alone in this. We're in this together." Danny looked up at him, uncertainty in his eyes. "But what if I mess up again?" Jamal smiled. "Then we'll fix it together. One step at a time." In that moment, Jamal realized that progress wasn't just about moving forward. It was about acknowledging the past, confronting the pain, and using those experiences to build something better. He couldn't change what had happened, but he could choose how to move forward. As he continued his internship, he found a new sense of purpose. He wasn't just helping the kids, he was helping himself. Each day was a step toward healing, toward breaking down the walls he had built, toward becoming the person he was meant to be. But the journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more setbacks. But Jamal was ready. He had learned that the price of progress was steep, but it was worth paying. The days following his father's hospitalization were a blur of emotions and realizations for Jamal. He had always believed that personal growth meant moving forward alone, but now he understood that true progress involved reconnecting with others and mending broken bonds. Determined to rebuild his relationship with his father, Jamal began visiting him regularly in the hospital. Their conversations were initially awkward, filled with long silences and hesitant words. But over time, they found common ground. Jamal shared his experiences at the community center, and his father spoke about his own struggles and regrets. Slowly, they began to understand each other better. One afternoon, as Jamal sat by his father's bedside, his father reached out and grasped his hand. "I'm proud of you, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I may not have been there when you needed me, but I'm here now." Tears welled up in Jamal's eyes as he squeezed his father's hand. "I know, Dad. And I'm here for you too." At the community center, Jamal focused on deepening his connections with the kids and fellow mentors. He spent extra time with Danny, helping him with schoolwork and talking about his dreams. He also organized group activities that encouraged collaboration and trust building among the kids. One day, Jamal introduced a team-building exercise where the kids had to work together to solve a series of challenges. The activity was met with enthusiasm, and for the first time, Jamal saw the kids supporting each other, sharing ideas, and celebrating each other's successes. Later, as they gathered for a debriefing session, one of the kids spoke up. "This was fun," he said. "We should do more stuff like this." Jamal smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment. "Absolutely," he replied. "Building bridges starts with us." Jamal also made an effort to reconnect with Ava, who had been his anchor throughout his journey. He invited her to join him at a community event, where they volunteered together and spent time talking and laughing. Their shared experiences reminded Jamal of the importance of having a support system and the strength that comes from mutual understanding. As they sat on a park bench after the event, Ava turned to him. "I'm proud of you, Jamal," she said. "You've come a long way." Jamal nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you." The days following his father's hospitalization were a blur of emotions and realizations for Jamal. He had always believed that personal growth meant moving forward alone, but now he understood that true progress involved reconnecting with others and mending broken bonds. Determined to rebuild his relationship with his father, Jamal began visiting him regularly in the hospital. Their conversations were initially awkward, filled with long silences and hesitant words. But over time, they found common ground. Jamal shared his experiences at the community center, and his father spoke about his own struggles and regrets. Slowly, they began to understand each other better. One afternoon, as Jamal sat by his father's bedside, his father reached out and grasped his hand. "I'm proud of you, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I may not have been there when you needed me, but I'm here now." Tears welled up in Jamal's eyes as he squeezed his father's hand. "I know, Dad. And I'm here for you too." At the community center, Jamal focused on deepening his connections with the kids and fellow mentors. He spent extra time with Danny, helping him with schoolwork and talking about his dreams. He also organized group activities that encouraged collaboration and trust building among the kids. One day, Jamal introduced a team-building exercise where the kids had to work together to solve a series of challenges. The activity was met with enthusiasm, and for the first time, Jamal saw the kids supporting each other, sharing ideas, and celebrating each other's successes. Later, as they gathered for a debriefing session, one of the kids spoke up. "This was fun," he said. "We should do more stuff like this." Jamal smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment. "Absolutely," he replied. "Building bridges starts with us." Jamal also made an effort to reconnect with Ava, who had been his anchor throughout his journey. He invited her to join him at a community event, where they volunteered together and spent time talking and laughing. Their shared experiences reminded Jamal of the importance of having a support system and the strength that comes from mutual understanding. As they sat on a park bench after the event, Ava turned to him. "I'm proud of you, Jamal," she said. "You've come a long way." Jamal nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you." The leaves had begun to change, the reds and golds painting the streets of the city as if nature itself was signaling a season of transformation. For Jamal, fall had always marked a kind of renewal, a new school year, a new chapter. But this time, it felt different. It felt permanent. Like a bridge he had finally built to carry him out of the past and towards something more. He stood at the edge of the community center's rooftop garden one crisp Saturday morning, watching the neighborhood come alive below. Children raced by on bikes, elderly couples strolled in quiet conversation, and street vendors opened up their carts. The noise and rhythm of life moved around him, but for the first time, Jamal felt still. Grounded. Danny was beside him, silent. The boy had come a long way over the past months. His posture was less guarded now, his eyes less stormy. Jamal had watched him slowly let go of the weight he carried, anger, fear, doubt, and replace it with something unfamiliar, belief. "College doesn't feel like a joke anymore," Danny said suddenly, eyes fixed on the horizon. "I used to think it wasn't for people like me. But now, I don't know. Maybe I'll give it a shot." Jamal smiled. "It's not a joke. It's a key. And you've already started unlocking doors most people don't even know are there." That morning would stay with Jamal long after. Because that wasn't just about Danny, it was about all of them. Every kid who walked into the center unsure of their place. Every late-night tutoring session. Every heart-to-heart. It was working. Slowly, painfully, imperfectly. But it was working. Later that week, Jamal sat across from his academic advisor, Dr. Winslow. He was nervous, but also excited. They were discussing his senior thesis proposal, a culmination of his studies and life experience wrapped into one bold idea. I want to explore how narrative mentorship, telling and sharing personal stories, impacts resilience in at-risk youth, Jamal explained. Especially in urban environments. I've seen firsthand how much storytelling changes lives. It changed mine. Dr. Winslow leaned back, visibly impressed. That's a powerful subject, Jamal. And it's yours. I see your fingerprints all over this. Jamal left the office with a grin that didn't fade for hours. He wasn't just surviving college anymore, he was owning it. More than that, he was contributing to it. He had always wondered if the pain he carried had a purpose. Now, he was turning it into a roadmap for others. That weekend, Ava joined him at his apartment for dinner. Jamal had cooked, poorly, but with effort, and they ate on the couch, legs tucked beneath throw blankets, music playing softly in the background. I read your draft, Ava said, pulling out a copy of his thesis proposal. It's beautiful. Honest. You're telling the story a lot of people are scared to say out loud. Jamal looked at her, grateful. I think I was scared too. For a long time. But if I've learned anything this year, it's that fear doesn't stop the story from happening. It just keeps you from owning it. She leaned her head on his shoulder. So what's next? After this? He didn't have a perfect answer. Grad school was an option. So was launching a nonprofit or staying on as a full-time mentor. But more than any title or path, he knew the why now. I want to keep building, he said. Bridges. Between kids like I used to be and the world they think they don't belong in. Between communities and institutions. Between silence and voice. The next Monday, Jamal stood in front of a classroom, yes, the very same one from the beginning of this story. Miss Palmer, the teacher who had once humiliated him, was absent that day. The school had invited alumni to return and speak to students about resilience and vision. He took a deep breath as the students looked up at him, some curious, some skeptical. Some of you are probably sitting here thinking this whole talk thing doesn't matter, he began. That school doesn't get you, that the people standing in front of this whiteboard don't understand your life. There were nods. Crossed arms. Familiar defiance. I get it. I used to sit right there, feeling the same way. I had a teacher laugh in my face once for answering a question she thought was wrong. 5 minutes later, I proved her wrong. Not to embarrass her, but to remind myself that my voice mattered. Now they were listening. He continued, telling them about the community center, about Danny, about his father. About building something lasting out of all the things that once tried to break him. When the bell rang, a girl in the front row raised her hand. Wait, what happened to that teacher? Jamal smiled. Doesn't really matter anymore. Because what she did doesn't define who I am. I do. It began as a modest invitation, a local youth leadership summit seeking speakers who had overcome adversity. Jamal had been asked to share his story, to talk about the community center, his father's recovery, and the young lives he had touched. He agreed, not thinking much of it. He had spoken before, to classrooms and small groups. This would be more of the same. But as the event approached, the scope expanded. The summit was now a citywide initiative, with attendees from schools, nonprofits, and local government. The venue changed from a community hall to the downtown convention center. Jamal's story was no longer just his own, it was a narrative that resonated with an entire community. On the day of the event, Jamal stood backstage, his heart pounding. He had prepared his speech, practiced his delivery, but nothing could have prepared him for the sea of faces that awaited him. Thousands of people, all eager to hear what he had to say. When his name was called, Jamal stepped onto the stage, the spotlight blinding him for a moment. He took a deep breath, adjusted the microphone, and began. He spoke of his struggles, of feeling invisible, of making choices that led him down dark paths. He spoke of the turning point, the moment he decided to change, to build bridges instead of walls. He spoke of the community center, of Danny, of Ava, of his father. He spoke of the power of mentorship, of second chances, of the importance of showing up for others. As he spoke, he saw the faces in the crowd, nodding, listening, some with tears in their eyes. He realized that his story was not just his own, it was theirs too. They had lived it, or were living it. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. Jamal stood there, overwhelmed, not by the applause, but by the realization that his words had connected with so many. He had shared his truth, and in doing so, had given others permission to share theirs. After the event, Jamal received messages from attendees, teachers, students, parents, thanking him for his words, for his honesty, for his courage. Some shared their own stories, others asked for advice, for guidance. Jamal realized that this was the beginning of something bigger than himself. This was the ripple effect of one person's story reaching out and touching the lives of many. That night, as he sat with Ava, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From the boy who felt invisible to the man who stood before thousands, sharing his truth. He had come a long way, and yet, he knew this was just the beginning. As the final chapter of his college journey drew near, Jamal felt the weight of his experiences settling into a quiet sense of fulfillment. He had come a long way since that first moment of being mocked in front of the class. The boy who had been humiliated, who had doubted his own worth, had now become someone who inspired thousands. But despite all the recognition and praise, Jamal knew that the true measure of success was not in the applause, but in the work that still lay ahead. The community center was thriving. Danny had enrolled in college and was thriving in his first semester. Several other kids from the program had earned scholarships, and many had secured internships in local businesses and nonprofits. Jamal had seen firsthand how the kids, once lost in their struggles, were now becoming leaders in their own right. And it wasn't just about academics, it was about self-belief, about overcoming obstacles, about knowing they had a future. But as the community center grew, so did the challenges. Funding was always a concern. Jamal had poured his heart and soul into the mentorship program, but sustainability was key. How could they ensure that this wasn't just a flash in the pan, a temporary moment of success? Jamal had a vision. He wanted to create something bigger than just a center, he wanted to establish a mentorship program that could be replicated in other cities. A network of centers where young people could find support, guidance, and the chance to realize their potential, just as he had. But it would take more than just passion. It would take organization, resources, and a long-term commitment. One afternoon, Jamal sat down with Ava, who had supported him every step of the way. "I've been thinking about the next steps," Jamal said, a sense of urgency in his voice. "This work is important, but it's not enough to just keep it going here. I want to build a framework, a program that can be implemented in other cities. We could reach so many more kids." Ava nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "You've always thought bigger than the moment, Jamal. It's time to think about the future. But this isn't just about you. It's about building something sustainable for the long haul." The idea was born. Jamal would take the steps necessary to formalize the mentorship program into a nonprofit organization. They would write a proposal, secure funding, and build partnerships with schools, businesses, and other community organizations. The vision was clear: create a network of youth mentorship hubs where young people could thrive, just as Jamal had. As they moved forward with their plans, Jamal reached out to his former professors, including Dr. Winslow, who had always believed in him. Together, they developed a comprehensive curriculum that combined academic support, life skills, and mentorship. The curriculum emphasized not just grades, but personal growth, teaching the kids how to navigate challenges, how to build resilience, and how to be leaders in their communities. It wasn't easy. There were countless meetings, late nights, and setbacks. But each small victory was a step closer to realizing the dream. They found donors who believed in their mission. They built relationships with schools willing to partner with them. Slowly but surely, the program began to take shape. 1 year later, Jamal stood in front of a small crowd at a local event, holding a plaque with the words, "Legacy Mentorship Network," engraved on it. The launch of the nonprofit was a milestone, a celebration of the years of hard work and dedication that had brought him to this moment. But as he looked around at the faces in the crowd, his father, Danny, Ava, his friends from the community, he knew this was just the beginning. "I'm not here to tell you how amazing this organization is," Jamal said, his voice steady and filled with purpose. "I'm here to remind you that this is your legacy too. This is a space where we all get to build, grow, and lift each other up. And it doesn't stop here." His voice cracked slightly, but he steadied himself. "If there's one thing I've learned, it's that you never have to go through life alone. I'm here because of the people who stood by me. And now, I'm standing here for all of you." The crowd erupted into applause, but Jamal wasn't thinking about the applause. He was thinking about all the young people who would walk through the doors of the Legacy Mentorship Network in the years to come. The kids who would find support, hope, and the belief that their dreams were possible. Jamal sat in his office late one evening, the glow of his computer screen illuminating the quiet space. The Legacy Mentorship Network was thriving, its presence slowly becoming a force in the community. But even as he worked tirelessly, planning for the next phase of their growth, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was starting to unfold. A year ago, he had stood in front of a room full of community members, holding that plaque with the organization's name carved into it. He had promised that this work would be bigger than him, that it would continue long after the applause faded. Now, that promise was becoming a reality. Young people were walking through the doors of their mentorship hubs every day, each with their own story, each carrying their own dreams. Yet, Jamal was learning that success, while deeply fulfilling, often came with new challenges. The organization was growing faster than he had expected. The demand for mentorship programs was far greater than the resources they had. It felt like they were always just one step behind, trying to meet the needs of the kids, the schools, the donors, and their own growing staff. He knew that growth was a good thing, but it was also overwhelming. One evening, Jamal met with Ava at their favorite cafe. She had become not only his partner in life but his sounding board, his most trusted advisor. She understood the weight he carried and had supported him through every obstacle. "How's everything going with the nonprofit?" Ava asked, sipping her coffee, her eyes focused on Jamal. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "It's amazing, Ava. It's everything I ever wanted. The kids are thriving, the staff is growing, and we've got support from some major donors now. But I'm struggling to keep up. There's just so much to do. We need more resources, more hands, more infrastructure. If we don't figure this out, we could fall behind." Ava smiled, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the storm swirling inside Jamal. "You know this is a good problem, right? The demand means that you're on the right track. People believe in what you're doing. It's not about doing it all yourself. It's about building the right team, scaling it in a sustainable way. You're not meant to do it alone." Her words hit home. Jamal had always prided himself on his ability to make things happen, to lead by example. But the truth was, he couldn't do everything on his own anymore. He needed to delegate, to trust others to take the reins. As his vision expanded, so did the need for more leaders, people who shared his passion and could carry the work forward. "I know," Jamal said, his voice tinged with frustration. "I'm just so used to doing it all myself. But I need help, Ava. I need to build a team that can help manage the day-to-day and allow me to focus on the bigger picture." Ava placed her hand on his. You're already doing it, Jamal. This is your next step, letting go of some control and letting others help you create the legacy you want. You can't do everything alone, and you don't have to. You've already built something incredible. Now, you have to trust in the people around you to take it even further. The following months were a whirlwind of decisions. Jamal began to meet with potential team members, hiring individuals who were not only qualified but also shared his vision for the future. He was careful about who he brought on board, knowing that the strength of the team would directly impact the future of the nonprofit. It wasn't just about finding employees, it was about building a community of like-minded individuals who believed in the same mission. At the same time, Jamal began to think about how to expand beyond the community he knew. The Legacy Mentorship Network had become a local success, but Jamal knew it had the potential to reach far beyond the city limits. He had always been passionate about reaching urban youth, but what if he could extend this impact to rural communities, to places where opportunities were even scarcer? He reached out to colleagues in other parts of the country, researching the needs of different regions, learning about the unique challenges faced by underserved communities. What he discovered shocked him: the lack of access to mentorship and support in rural areas was just as devastating as it was in urban ones. But Jamal's organization, built on connection and support, had the ability to bridge that gap. One afternoon, Jamal found himself in a small town in Tennessee, meeting with local leaders, teachers, and students. He was here to explore the possibility of launching a new hub for the Legacy Mentorship Network. The town was different from his own, smaller, quieter, but the need was clear. Kids here needed a space to grow, to learn, and to be seen. As Jamal spoke with the local high school students, he was struck by their energy and resilience. They were just like the kids he had mentored back home, dreamers, survivors, each carrying their own burdens. Some had parents who had struggled with addiction, others had been in and out of foster care. But despite it all, they still believed in the possibility of something better. They just didn't know how to get there. When Jamal finished speaking, one of the students, a girl named Emma, raised her hand. How do we make sure this lasts? How do we make sure the next generation gets the same chance we did? Jamal paused for a moment, reflecting on the question. That's the most important question, Emma. It's not enough to create opportunities. We have to build systems that can stand the test of time. We need to create leaders who can carry the torch forward, who can inspire the next generation, and the next. In the coming months, Jamal worked tirelessly to establish the new hub in Tennessee, bringing together a local team to ensure its success. The ripple effect was beginning to take shape. The success of the Legacy Mentorship Network in one city had created momentum that was now spreading across state lines, impacting communities far and wide. But Jamal was beginning to realize that this ripple wasn't just about expanding the program, it was about creating a movement. It was about changing the way communities saw youth mentorship. It was about demonstrating that every young person, regardless of where they came from, had the potential to change the world. And with each new hub, with each new story, Jamal was reminded of why he started this journey in the first place. It wasn't about accolades or recognition. It was about making sure that the next generation of kids wouldn't have to fight alone. It was about providing them with the tools, the guidance, and the belief that their futures were theirs to shape. The sun was setting over the city, casting a warm glow over the community center as Jamal sat in his office, staring out the window. It had been years since that pivotal moment when his world had been shaken by mockery in front of his classmates. Now, here he was, looking at the vibrant community around him, the legacy of his journey. But Jamal knew, more than ever, that his work was far from finished. The Legacy Mentorship Network had expanded from a single local center to a nationwide initiative. Hundreds of youth were being mentored, guided by a new generation of leaders who had been trained and inspired by Jamal's own story. Yet, despite the accomplishments, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the network needed something more, a sense of unity, a deeper connection to the heart of what they were doing. He had always worked alone at the beginning, driven by a personal need to prove himself. But now, with the organization growing so rapidly, Jamal knew it was no longer just about one person. It was about the collective effort, the community coming together to change lives. He had built a foundation, but now it was time to build something even more powerful, a unified vision that would tie everything together. A call interrupted his thoughts. It was Danny, now a mentor at the Legacy Mentorship Network. "Hey, Jamal. We've got a situation. One of the new centers in Detroit is facing some major challenges. The kids aren't engaging, and the team there is struggling to connect with the community. We need to do something before this becomes a bigger issue." Jamal's mind immediately started to race. Detroit had been one of the first cities outside their hometown to adopt the Legacy program. He had hoped it would flourish, but hearing that things weren't going well brought a heavy sense of responsibility. "I'm on my way," Jamal said, hanging up the phone. The flight to Detroit was a quiet one. Jamal had been here before, several times, meeting with local leaders, trying to get the new hub off the ground. But hearing this news felt different. His success up until now had been defined by the tangible results, the scholarships, the kids getting second chances, the schools and community organizations that rallied around the program. But this felt like a real test, a challenge not just of the organization's reach, but of its soul. When Jamal arrived at the center, he was greeted by a team of young mentors, most of whom were newly trained, eager but visibly overwhelmed. They led him to the back room where the students usually gathered, but it was eerily empty. He could hear faint voices from outside, but inside, the silence was deafening. "Where are the kids?" Jamal asked one of the mentors. "Not sure," she replied, her voice tinged with frustration. "We've been trying everything, games, group activities, motivational talks, but they don't seem to want to be here. They come in late, leave early, or don't show up at all." Jamal let the silence linger. He understood their frustration. This wasn't just about a lack of effort, this was a deeper issue. It wasn't just the kids, it was the disconnect, the inability to see past the surface, to truly understand why the kids weren't engaging. Later that evening, Jamal sat down with the students who had shown up for their evening session. He didn't have a speech prepared. He wasn't here to give another motivational talk. He was here to listen. "I want to know something," Jamal began, his voice calm and unassuming. "What's going on? Why aren't you all excited to be here?" The room grew still. One of the older students, a young man named Marcus, spoke up. "You think you can just come in here and make everything better by talking at us, but you don't get it. You don't know what it's like. We're stuck. Nobody really listens to us. It's like we don't matter, no matter how hard we try." Jamal nodded, his heart heavy with the truth in Marcus's words. He had been there before, the feeling of being invisible, the frustration of wanting more but not knowing how to make it happen. "You're right," Jamal said quietly. "I don't know exactly what it's like, but I want to. I want to understand, and I want to help. But I can't do that if you don't let me in." The room was silent for a long time. It wasn't that they didn't want help. It was that they had been hurt too many times to believe it would make a difference. Jamal understood this, and for the first time, he realized that to truly make a difference, he would have to do more than just offer solutions. He would need to earn their trust, prove that he was genuinely invested in them, not as a mentor, but as someone who had walked a similar path. The next few days in Detroit were a blur of conversations, reflections, and late nights. Jamal spent time with the kids, not in formal settings, but just talking to them, asking questions, sharing his own struggles, showing them that he understood their pain. And bit by bit, the walls began to come down. The students started to open up, and they began to see that Jamal wasn't there to fix them, he was there to walk with them. By the end of the week, something had shifted. The group began to engage, to participate. They shared their dreams, their fears, their goals. They started to work together, not because they were told to, but because they had begun to believe in themselves and in the people around them. Jamal knew that this was the heart of the Legacy Mentorship Network. It wasn't about programs or curriculums, it was about connection. It was about seeing the humanity in each person, acknowledging their struggles, and standing beside them, not in front of them. As Jamal returned to his office, he felt a profound sense of peace. The struggles in Detroit had shown him something he hadn't fully realized before. The Legacy Mentorship Network was not just an organization, it was a movement, a collection of communities coming together, not just to mentor, but to build genuine relationships. It was about unity, about understanding, and about recognizing that everyone had a part to play in the future they were all creating. In the months that followed, Jamal's focus shifted. He worked alongside his team to ensure that each center, each hub, became a space for real connection, for shared experiences, and for collective growth. The focus wasn't just on the kids, it was on everyone involved, the mentors, the parents, the community. They were all part of this new vision for the future. And as the network continued to expand, Jamal knew one thing for sure: this was more than just a program. This was a family, a collective force of unity, and together, they were forging a future that was brighter for every young person they reached. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?